Welcome to Across Africa, our weekly roundup of stories from across the continent. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith, and coming up, Kenya's High Court refused to abolish a law criminalizing homosexuality. LGBT campaigners fear that the move could be a setback to gay communities around the continent. Also, one of Africa's most famous authors, Kenyan Binyavanga Wainaina, has passed away. The renowned gay rights activist was named as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people after he came out in 2014 saying that he wanted to chip away at others' shame. And the downfall of Sudan's Omar al-Bashir has other regional leaders worried. Some analysts believe that Chad's Idris Deby has agreed to keep Ramadan prices fixed because he's worried that the social movement that brought down his Sudanese neighbour could become contagious. But first, Kenya's High Court has rejected a petition to scrap laws criminalizing homosexuality. LGBT activists worry that the ruling could influence legislators across the continent. Homosexuality is still illegal in most African countries, and only South Africa has greenlit gay marriage. Maud Julien has more.
Kenya's president said last year that gay rights were not a matter of concern to ordinary people, and that 99% of Kenyans were in favor of laws criminalizing homosexuality. Legislation across the continent could appear to support his claim. Only 21 out of 49 African countries have decriminalized same-sex relations. In Mauritania, Sudan, northern Nigeria, and southern Somalia, homosexual acts are punishable by death, though there have been no executions in recent years. Religious authorities, both Muslim and Christian, exert influence on communities, and many, like this Kenyan bishop, are vocal opponents of same-sex unions.
The country has been defended by this ruling. There is a voice of God that is speaking now to say that we have listened to the voice of God. And that voice of God is enshrined in our constitution, the preamble, that we people of Kenya, the sovereignty of this country, we are a people made by God. And therefore, no human law can abrogate what God has ordained.
Yet more and more activists are emerging in many African countries to demand equal rights. They risk social exclusion and even attacks, but some of them have obtained change. In Mozambique, Angola, and Seychelles, homosexuality is no longer a crime. In South Africa, same-sex marriage is legal. But today's disappointment isn't the first. In recent years, Chad, Uganda, and Nigeria have introduced new legislation or toughened existing laws.
Now, that ruling came just days after one of Africa's most famous authors, Kenyan Binyavanga Wainaina, died aged 48. The renowned gay rights activist was, in 2014, named as Time magazine's 100 most influential people. He came out about 5 years ago saying that he felt an obligation to chip away at the shame that some people felt about being gay.
It's a great loss for the African continent's literary world. Kenyan author Binyavanga Wainaina has died aged 48. He was living with HIV. In 2014, he came out as a homosexual just as anti-gay legislation was passed in Nigeria, a country he dearly loved.
I see my coming out as an intervention in a moment in time. An intervention that was like, if I have to live accountably here, I don't want my brothers and sisters to be dying and being beaten in Nigeria. And then I'm kind of quiet, I'm making loud noises and saying it's they. Oh yeah, those people who are gay, I'm feeling for them. I just felt that that intervention was necessary. But for example, I don't sit in my library reading gay books only.
Wainaina was famous for his essay ironically titled How to Write About Africa, a lesson for would-be journalists. Here are just 3 of his recommendations.
These are the taboo subjects: ordinary domestic scenes, love between Africans, mention of school-going children who are not suffering from yaws or Ebola fever, or female genital mutilation. Among your characters, you must always include the starving African, who wanders the refugee camp nearly naked and waits for the benevolence of the West. Never ever say anything negative about an elephant or a gorilla. Elephants may attack people's property, destroy their crops, and even kill them. Always take the side of the elephant.
His acclaimed memoirs were titled One Day I Will Write About This Place. In it, he says he was always addicted to reading. The gay rights activist died just 2 days before Kenya's High Court rejected a bid to repeal colonial-era laws criminalising gay sex.
Wildlife bosses have warned that Botswana's decision to lift a ban on elephant hunting will have effects across the continent. The country is home to about 130,000 elephants, which is about a third of all of Africa's savanna elephants. The government says it's being lifted partly because of human-animal friction, as the beasts come into contact with rural communities. But some critics suspect that it's motivated more by political friction between the current president and his predecessor, who brought in the ban.
Elephants than Botswana. They are at least 135,000 and they roam freely. But their number might fall because the government has lifted its blanket ban on hunting. Some local communities welcomed the decision. They said that in certain areas there were too many elephants and that they were endangering people, cattle and crops. President Mokwetsi Masisi, who took over from Ian Khama last year, had ordered a public review on the ban. Some observers say lifting it will be a popular move with many rural voters ahead of the general election in October. Ian Khama had introduced the prohibition in 2014. Its reversal is a sign of the growing tensions between Khama and his handpicked successor. Environmentalist groups like Humane Society International are outraged by Masisi's decision.
Resuming hunting is not only morally questionable and flies in the face of all international efforts to protect these giants, but it will also likely damage Botswana's hugely valuable tourism industry.
Many of Botswana's elephants roam into neighbouring Namibia, Zambia and Zimbabwe. All 4 countries want the global ban on elephant ivory trade to be relaxed. They argue that the increasing number of the animals in some regions has become problematic.
The downfall of former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has had effects throughout the region. Chad has recently announced that the prices of staple foods won't go up during Ramadan like they normally do. Some analysts believe that it's a precautionary move by President Idris Deby because he's worried that the social movement that brought down his Sudanese neighbour could become contagious.
The shops in Chad that are taking part in the operation called The Right Price have put up these posters. Prices often surge during Ramadan. To limit inflation, the government and the Chamber of Commerce have fixed the price of certain basic products.
C'est une initiative qui était propre aux commerçants.
The initiative was launched by shopkeepers. They were tired of being blamed for all of the Chadian problems, so they formed a group and came to see us at the Chamber of Commerce. And with our help, they launched the operation called The Right Price.
Nous avons lancé l'initiative Juste Prix.
Groups close to the opposition called it a political maneuver.
With this operation, they are playing to the gallery. I mean it. Shopkeepers are angry right now. They weren't consulted. And it's during Ramadan that they usually raise the prices of basic food products.
Some analysts believe President Idris Deby launched this campaign because of what happened in neighbouring Sudan. In April, his counterpart Omar al-Bashir was toppled by the army following huge protests that were initially about the price of bread. The relationship between the 2 leaders had greatly improved in recent years after a period when they had been supporting each other's rebel groups. Omar al-Bashir was president for 3 decades. Idris Deby is not far behind. He has now been in power for 29 years.
Silk production has traditionally been based in countries like China and Japan, but the industry has long been in decline. That's been matched, though, by Kenya's rise in the world of rearing silkworms as climate change sees more farmers moving away from traditional cash crops like coffee and maize.
Breeding silkworms for the production of raw silk has existed in China for 5,000 years. It is now becoming more and more popular in Kenya. Farmers are preferring it to traditional cash crops like coffee, maize, sugarcane and cotton. Climate change and unfavourable weather patterns have led to low earnings in those sectors. But rearing silkworms, which is known as sericulture, is less dependent on the weather.
In countries where it is hugely done, it's getting down. The production is lowering. In China, it has more or less completely reduced in Japan. And in India, India is doing well with the silk. So we feel that Kenya can contribute to global silk demand.
For the farmers, it offers a stable source of income that comes every 3 weeks when they deliver their produce. Silkworm rearing on an acre of land can fetch up to $15,000 annually. Newton Owino now employs 15 people on his silk farm.
This is the 26th day, and you can see the silkworm are already spinning. They are making cocoons. In other words, they have already reached the stage that we call pupal stage. Yeah, so as they spin, we harvest our cocoons.
Silk is not only used for textile and fabrics. It's also included in the manufacture of contact lenses, films, soaps, skin products and toothpaste. Last year, the world's largest silk producer, a Chinese firm, announced plans to create a silk processing factory and farm in Kenya. If successful, the venture is expected to create more than 300,000 jobs in the East African country.
Well, that's it for Across Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.